What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are hopping into our Week 10 waiver wire must adds for the 2022 fantasy football season. If you guys do enjoy today's content or find it helpful, be sure to hit that like button on the way in. Hit that subscribe button. Of course, if you're new to the channel, it really does help us out if you guys hit that like and consider subscribing, and please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let's hop into today's video. First up on the list, we've got Jeff Wilson of the Miami Dolphins, who came in with 16.2 fantasy points in Week 9 against the Chicago Bears. 9 rushing attempts, 51 yards on the ground, 3 targets, 3 receptions, and a receiving touchdown. A good outing in his first game with the Dolphins. Wasn't exactly sure how much work he was going to get. Obviously, his former offensive coordinator and his now head coach, Mike McDaniel, wanted to get him involved right away. Don't get me wrong, where he most started is still going to be a factor. He had 9 touches on the ground. But at the end of the day, Jeff Wilson had the better fantasy performance out of the 2 running backs. I think the thing to keep in mind with Jeff Wilson, even though I still believe he's in a committee with most start, is the fact that this Miami Dolphins offense is for real. When Tua is healthy, they are going to continue to be a large factor in fantasy football, so we want to get as many pieces of this Dolphins team as possible. Jeff Wilson becomes a priority add as we move into Week 10. All right, next up on the list, we've got Tyler Algier of the Atlanta Falcons. He looked really sharp in Week 9 on the ground. 10 touches, 99 yards on the ground, and 1 reception for 24 receiving yards. Finished with 13.3 fantasy points in full PPR after finishing with 17.5 in Week 8 against the Carolina Panthers. At the moment, he is 65% rostered, so I get he might not be available in your league, but it's pretty slim pickings out here in Week 10 on the waiver wire, and it's another good matchup in Week 10 against the Carolina Panthers, who we just at 17.5 fantasy points against in Week 8, like I said. So, told you guys all week, right? There's a little bit of risk with the Falcons backfield moving into Week 9, but this Chargers run defense is so bad that I believed more than one running back was going to emerge. And while I liked Caleb Huntley, told you guys all week, I got that feeling about Tyler Algier. I think he can get it done even with Cordero Patterson's return, and Cordero Patterson looked good in his return, finishing with 18.3 fantasy points. But the point being is that I think Tyler Algier in his rookie season is going to continue to build on this momentum. He is probably a player we can consider flexing on a weekly basis against the right defense. And in Week 10 against the Carolina Panthers, I think he's going to be another factor for the Atlanta Falcons. All right, next up on the list, we've got Nicole Hartman, currently rostered in 46% of fantasy leagues. I really begged you guys after Week 7 to go after Hartman, even with the Week 8 bye, and man, he looked good again in Week 9. He has at least 12 fantasy points in full PPR in his last 4 games. He's got 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games. Wide receiver position is actually starting to hold value for the Kansas City Chiefs, and I get that there's a lot of targets to go around between Juju, MVS, Hardman, and Travis Kelce, but at the end of the day, Hardman has shown enough consistency that he should be rostered. Definitely think he's more consistent than MVS, and while Juju is definitely starting to emerge as well, Hardman should be rostered. You got Juju sitting at 94% rostered. I think Hardman should be much closer to that number from where he sits at 46% rostered moving into Week 10 of the season. All right, our second receiver on the list is going to be Terrace Marshall Jr. of the Carolina Panthers. Am I fully ready to trust any of the Panthers receivers with PJ Walker exiting the Week 9 matchup and Baker Mayfield stepping in? I'm not exactly sure, but at the end of the day, it is a very weak waiver wire moving into Week 10, and Terrace Marshall had 12.7 fantasy points in Week 8 against Atlanta, and Week 9 against Cincinnati at 14.3 fantasy points, has at least 50 receiving yards or a touchdown in his last 2 games, and he faces the Atlanta Falcons once again in Week 10, who are the worst team in the league from a fantasy perspective against the wide receiver position. So really, regardless of the quarterback position, although I feel like I have a little bit more faith in PJ Walker than Baker Mayfield, but at the end of the day, Baker threw the touchdown to Marshall in this game. So I don't know. Regardless of the quarterback position, this is a good matchup, and Marshall has shown enough consistency over the last 2 weeks that we can trust him moving in to Week 10. All right, moving on to the tight end position, we got Greggy D 2.0. Greg Dulcich, rostered in 39% of fantasy leagues, got dropped in a lot of leagues because he was on bye week in week 9, and we had so many teams on bye week in week 9. So Greg Dulcich might be available in your league. He has at least 11 fantasy points in his first 3 starts, didn't play until week 6 of the season. Didn't matter who was at quarterback. We know that Russell Wilson is more than likely going to be at quarterback for the rest of the season as long as he's healthy. Regardless, Greg Dulcich performed, and I think he should absolutely be rostered in more leagues. He gets Tennessee in week 10. Not the greatest matchup, not the worst matchup. At the end of the day, man, he needs to be rostered with the consistency that he's shown in PPR leagues moving forward. Oh man, how the turntables turn. Let's talk about Cole Kmet. Felt like the most disappointing tight end if we compared the off-season opinion of Cole Kmet to the beginning of the season opinion of Cole Kmet. He gave us 2 goose eggs to start the season, and he had not reached double-digit fantasy performances until week 9, where he had 6 targets, 5 receptions, 41 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. He also had a touchdown in week 8 against Dallas. That's 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, 22 fantasy points in week 9. He's 22% rostered according to the Sleeper app at the moment. With the consistency that he's shown over the last 2 weeks and the fact that this Bears offense is really starting to emerge and become an actual threat, I really actually think we can trust Cole Kmet as we approach week 10. On top of that, it's a really good matchup against the Detroit Lions, who actually played okay against the Packers, but I don't know if that's going to be a consistent thing. Overall, the Lions have not played well against the tight end position on the season, so I do think Kmet is a good streaming option and a player we need to take a harder look at as this Bears offense, led by Justin Fields, continues to emerge. All right, moving on to the quarterback position, we have to talk about Justin Fields, currently rostered in 68% of fantasy leagues. Guys, it needs to be much closer to 99% of fantasy leagues. Probably not available in your league, but if he is, even if you have a solid quarterback one, go out and get Fields. I don't care at this point. Taking him away from a quarterback needy team and just having him on your bench is going to give you an advantage. He is playing monster football right now. 42.7 fantasy points in week 9, a monster performance, set an NFL record with 178 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 123 passing yards, and 3 touchdowns. He now has at least 24 fantasy points in his last 3 games, at least 17 fantasy points in his last 5 games, with a ceiling of 42.7 fantasy points. He gets the Detroit Lions in week 10. He gets the Atlanta Falcons in week 11. This momentum should only continue to rise. Fields looks like the real deal. He looks like the exact type of quarterback we want in fantasy football. Make sure he's rostered in your league. If he is available, make sure he's not available as we approach week 10. All right, it's not a great week at the quarterback position on the waiver wire, but I'm gonna give you guys 2 streaming options in case you have a quarterback on bye. Danny Dimes, coming off a very bad performance in week 8 against the Seattle Seahawks, was on bye week in week 9, but should be able to bounce back against the Houston Texans, who aren't playing awful defensively, but are still not the best defense out there. So I think that Daniel Jones against Houston is a good streaming option, and he more than likely got dropped because he was on bye week in week 9 in your league, and heading into week 9 he was a top 10 quarterback in fantasy football. So I do think he is a quarterback you can go out and grab if you're in a desperate position. Outside of that, we got Marcus Mariota, also coming off of a bad game with 7.5 fantasy points, his second worst performance on the season. But let's look back to week 8, where he had 24.4 fantasy points, 3 passing touchdowns, 43 rushing yards, and 253 passing yards against the Carolina Panthers. He'll be facing the Carolina Panthers again in week 10. I expect a much better performance in week 10 comparison to week 9 for Marcus Mariota. So not my favorite quarterbacks, but overall, once again, going into week 9, Mariota was your quarterback 8. Going into week 9, Daniel Jones was your quarterback 10. So I think that they're both viable options as we approach week 10 of the 2022 fantasy football season. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button, of course, if you are new to the channel. And feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And of course, let me know who is your top priority on the waiver wire as we approach week 10 of the 2022 fantasy football season. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.